Returning to the stage is Dr. Christina Dean. Thank you very much. And we also have Kay Liu. She's the Educational Director from Redress. And we have Michelle Lee, which is a Marketing and E-commerce Director from our collective. I did have a brief spiel written for both of you, but I think it might be best if you do your own intros.
Yeah. I'll jump in.
Okay,
so croaky voice Christina is back on stage, joined by my two wonderful colleagues, actually. As you know, I'm the founder of Redress. Kay Liu's the Educational Director, who I've been working with for years and years and years on waste reduction and circularity. Michelle is the Marketing Director and E-com Director for the R Collective, which is a social impact brand that was developed from Redress to support Redress. So here we are. I'm going to start with the UK. You've got a master's in ethical fashion. You've been a designer. You've had your head down in sustainable fashion, waste reduction, circularity for 15 years. Yeah. So she's going to give us a snapshot in a couple of minutes what's been going on in circular fashion.
Well, if you talk about circular fashion, you know, the history of it, I don't want to go into too much about it, but really it's as old as the tree because, you know, the principle is really based on the nature. You know, imagine that when the leaves on the tree drops, it becomes a nutrient and feeds back in the tree. That's really the principle. Very easy, very, you know, straightforward concept to grasp. But what we're seeing recently, you know, it's talking really about resources and ways how you can put it back into the system. So it was a moral issue, really. But what we're seeing recently, what's really interesting is that it becomes a money issue. That's when a lot of businesses really become interested in this topic, become, you know, interested in this system. How do they bring it into the businesses?
So we're talking money now.
Yeah.
That always gets people on the edge of your seats. We're talking about money and circularity. What's it worth?
Well, but what's happening, before we go into what's it worth, actually, so, you know, like people are seeing business, seeing money in it, but at the same time, actually, only 9% of our world is doing circular. So we're not doing very well.
So what, 9% of the global economy is circular?
Yeah.
Across all industries or just fashion?
Across all industry,
right.
Food, you know, packaging, everything, really. So, but I mean, when it comes back to fashion, what we're not even doing as well as the food industry, for example. You know, so for example, like 93 million tons of fiber is produced for clothing every year, but we send 73% of that into landfill or into incinerator. So we're wasting a lot here. But while 50 billion US dollars should be captured on that and put it back into the system, actually, that's how much it's worth in terms of fashion.
So we're basically putting a huge amount of fiber in, and we're incinerating 73% or landfilling 73% of all fibers. So it does make the industry appear to be incredibly stupid, if you don't mind me saying. So, I mean, I love the industry, but, you know, we're incinerating 73% of our fibers and landfilling. It's nuts. So it's worth 500 billion.
Yes, yeah.
So Ellen MacArthur, can you just briefly talk me through Ellen MacArthur as a driver for knowledge in the circular system?
Yeah, so the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, which is founded by Dame Ellen MacArthur, is the think tank on circular fashion. They produce all this, you know, reports, research, statistics to support how much it's worth of it and how much we need to do to combat this environmental crisis, really. And so they actually come up with 3 principles to tell people how you can do it, to tell businesses, not just only fashion, but, you know, across food and plastics, etc. So what we need to do first is actually to design our waste and pollution. You know, secondly, also we need to keep materials and product in use as long as possible. And the last one is how do we regenerate, you know, what we're producing back into nature. So there's really 3 guiding principles that they came up with to support with how we can create a circular economy.
Because, I mean, sometimes you say circular economy and I want to fall asleep. It seems quite boring, actually. But I obviously love it. But, you know, it can seem a little bit dull, right?
Yeah.
Even to you. Yeah. But I would suggest for people who really, truly want to understand this, because truly when you dig into it, it's absolutely fascinating. The Ellen MacArthur, the New Textiles Economy Report is absolutely groundbreaking, and it's a page-turner if you're into the circular economy. And actually, I want to quickly share very, very briefly why Dame Ellen MacArthur has become such a beacon of hope for the circular economy. I mean, do you know who Dame Ellen MacArthur is? She's a sailor. She's British. She's sailed the fastest around the world, something like that. When she planned her boat, she made it so efficient. When she put everything on it, she only brought exactly what she needed, and she sped around the world by herself. And it was through that experience that she realized how important resources are. And through that, this sailor has become our complete beacon of hope. So New Textiles Economy Report, please, you can, again, executive summary or go geeky on the 80-page report. We just want action right now. You know, I think I said that in the previous panel. We know the crisis. We're all here. We know the background. How are brands moving towards this kind of circular, sustainable? I'm not talking about practical, what they are actually doing, but what momentum are we seeing from brands taking action?
Well, in the last 2-3 years, we're seeing a lot of that, you know, and, you know, there are two really important organizations. They're making galvanizing effort and, you know, collecting brands like, we really want to make changes here. Who's doing that? Put your hands up. You know, what we're seeing recently is like the global fashion agenda. They make brands to make commitments to it. So what we're seeing is like 90, so far they've got 90 signatories, you know, from brands like Kering Group, Puma, Adidas, H&M, you know, like that represents about 12.5% of the global fashion market, actually. That's quite large, really, you know, who's really wanted to make change through circular fashion. And, you know, on the practical side, actually, so they come up with 4 actionable points for all the signatories to make commitment to. You know, the 4R, sorry, I have to read my notes, actually. You know, they're asking brands to make commitments like implementing design strategies towards cyclability. And the second one is asking them to increase the volume of used clothes and garments that are for collected, for collection. You know, so the third one is also increasing the volume of used clothes and footwear for resale, actually. And the last one's probably harder to tackle, actually, is to increase the share of goods like fashion and footwear that are made of post-consumer fiber.
So Global Fashion Agenda, they're the organizers of the Copenhagen Fashion Summit. If you look up there, you can easily find those signatories, and it might be interesting for some of you, maybe suppliers or on the supply chain side, to look at which brands have signed up to increase their circularity, because it's a voluntary thing, and we all know what voluntary means. You know, you don't have to do it. But those who have signed up, they actually have sort of targets that they've set for themselves. Yeah. So it might be worth just having a little look at who's going to be driving each stage of those circularity things. I think briefly, Fashion Pact, because it's so new. Tell us what it is.
Yeah, that's another great initiative, you know, that collected, I think it's 150 brands, I mean, from 32 companies to sign up. It's really about taking actions against climate change. We all know that, you know, we are facing a climate crisis here. So, you know, it's really about how do we work together from the industry to keep the you know, temperature down. Really, is about, you know, it's about how do we keep that 1.5 degrees down, actually. So again, you know, this is huge commitment that we're seeing the industry are making, and they're, you know, actionable points to help them, to guide them how they can do it. I mean, there's 2 really great tools out there I'm seeing, like guiding companies on what they can do. You know, the one is by the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, which is called the Jeans Redesign Guides. You know, that's absolutely practical. It's telling you how do you make products. Well, this is jeans. He's talking about, you know, like how do you make it more durable, for example? How do you increase the recyclability of jeans? So, I mean, do check it out. Another one that I would recommend is the Nike Circular Design Guide. It's got great examples, case studies with videos, and, you know, it's really, it gives you a really great snapshot of what you can do to turn your products, to turn your brand towards circular.
I think that's exactly what I'd like to hand over to Michelle, because again, circularity, big, but we just want to talk about action now to sort of demystify it. So with the R Collective, Michelle, introduce us the brand first, please.
Hi. So at the R Collective, we rescue excess materials from luxury brands, mills, and manufacturers, and we upcycle them to create new collections. And we reimagine the destiny of these textile waste that might otherwise go to landfill or incineration. As well as rescuing all these beautiful excess materials, we also strive to utilize zero waste design techniques to try and reduce the amount of waste even at the pattern cutting stage and design stage as well. So traditional pattern cutting, for example, would waste about 16% of the fabric, but we try to maximize the fabric usage as much as possible. So we managed to reduce that down to 1% or less. So that's what we're doing at the Art Collective.
So with circularity in relation to the Art Collective business model, so the primary goal of the business is to reduce waste. So can you tell us how brands and businesses in general partner with the Art Collective on their waste, and what's in it for the brand?
Yeah, so we partner with lots of luxury brands, and it's good for them to kind of do the responsible thing, right? They are going to have excess inventory and excess materials. What happens to that material? So they work with us to basically provide us the materials that we can design into. So it's avoiding these materials from being downcycled or, at the worst, go to landfill or incineration.
And brands are liking the opportunity to pass on their excess materials?
Yeah, I mean, I can't announce the names right now, but hopefully we can announce brand names, luxury brand names, in the next year. But it's good for them to have a solution really for their waste materials.
And that's just it. It's a solution. It doesn't it's driving a small part of circularity, but it's obviously not going to solve the bigger issue of circularity. What about from the design stage? I mean, maybe Kay, you can also jump in here. We know that from the 80% supposedly of the environmental impact of a product is laid down at the design stage. And we know that to create a circular fashion industry, it needs to start at the design. It needs to start in the brain. We spoke about mindsets and on the previous panel, but it is education and mindset at design. So I don't mind who talks first, but I'd like to just lock our guests and our friends at the design stage and for circularity.
Well, for us, it's interesting because usually for a traditional designer, they'll have a design concept and then they'll create the fabric and request, what trims, etc. they want. Whereas it's completely different for us. We have circularity in mind the whole time. We have to design into that waste. So we have to work with the materials that we're provided with. We have a bank of fabrics that we effectively design into. We don't necessarily dictate what that might look like. So we have to be quite creative, really, in that solution. It's amazing that we have these partnerships with all these fantastic mills and manufacturers and these brands that offer us these materials. But we have to take creativity into play here and design into those waste materials. Mm-hmm.
What about the choice of materials? Thinking about in the circular system, there are loops. You can have, I'd like UK to talk about this really, but how do the designers think about circular systems and material choices when they're actually selecting their materials?
So it is actually really important when you talk about materials. It's a bit like a cook understanding its ingredients. So what we've been working with in recent years, like in the industry, we use a lot of fabrics that is like mixed fiber content, that help us to maintain the cost and also increase the quality, the strength, etc., etc. But what we're finding actually at the end of life is it's very hard to recycle those materials, So how do we increase the recyclability? Actually, you can start from the materials. Think about how do I, make sure that I keep all my products, one single fiber group. So that really allowed a lot of opportunity for recycling, and so to create new products that are made of recycled materials. So that's really huge sticking points that we're seeing in the industry. So when you start with how can you design differently with materials in mind, even thread. A lot of thread that we use are made of polyester. So when you have something that is made of cotton, for example, when you add polyester thread in, you have to remove the polyester thread before you can recycle the fabrics actually.
So, yeah. Do you think we might have another mic, please? You have you have a lot of knowledge around next gen designers, and for people on the supply chain here, Kay and through the work of Redress really do know what's going on with next gen designers. So how would you advise our friends here around how they're thinking around circularity? This is pipeline designers. These are going to be designing the clothes for the future. What's the pipeline like?
I I think what we're seeing in recent years, what is really exciting is how much they are thinking holistically. You know, they're not only just thinking of upcycling, zero waste, they're really thinking about, okay, how my clothes is being worn? How is it going to be used by consumers? How is it going to be washed? How is it going to be cared? And what they're going to do with it after they no longer want the products. So they really started to have that 360 degrees of thinking. So that is really important when you step into circularity, is, you know, literally, like, think of a circle.
And what sort of age and level of designer can we call this a revolution on the design, the emerging designer level?
Yeah, I think so. Yes, I mean, it's really cropping up in the last, I would say, 3 years. We're seeing a lot of changes in the mindset of designers, especially those coming from Europe, those coming from the US. But what is even more exciting is, like, we're seeing that sort of level of knowledge is being increased from designers from China, from Hong Kong. Yeah.
So just, you know, from the design board, things are definitely certainly changing. I want to talk about the world of retail, though. Maybe coming back to you, Michelle, and briefly introduce some of your personal background in retail. And then secondly, tell us, in relation to the circular economy, what's going on in retail?
Okay, so I started my career in fast fashion. I worked at ASOS.com, and I also worked with Forever 21. So I've worked in the buying side, I've worked in product development, merchandising, marketing, pretty much across the whole scope of fashion retail. And fast forward a couple of years, I started my own business as well in the UK. So I developed my own women's wear collection and wholesaled that. And fast forward again to 4 years ago, I came to Hong Kong and joined another startup that was also in women's and maternity retail. And this year I joined the R Collective to head up marketing and e-commerce. So I have quite a broad overview look on fashion retail. I've always worked in fashion retail my entire career. And I have an interesting viewpoint from looking at it from fast fashion, but becoming very conscious about ethical fashion right from maybe 7 or 8 years ago. And then more recently, kind of just this year, really delving deeper into now like circular fashion, which is quite new for me, really. And actually what's really interesting, according to the Accenture fashion report, the future of circular fashion rather, is that actually really circular fashion, I feel, is the future of retail. We have so many existing resources already, and we're wasting so many textile materials. As you said, early 92 million tons of textile waste is generated every year. We have all these available resources, and businesses are realizing that there's really an opportunity to drive higher margins by using existing resources. So for us at the R Collective, we're using available materials, but also in the retail industry, there's the re-commerce market, the subscription model, and also the peer-to-peer rental market as well. And as I said in the report, that's actually shown that it does drive higher profit margins per garment compared to the linear model.
Yeah, so just say that name of that report, because it's actually another nice, easy, quick read. What is it again, please?
The Future of Circular Fashion, and that's by the Accenture and Fashion for Good.
And it's just from May this year. And again, it just shows that we're getting a lot of new reports on the financial viability of the circular economy, which is always, of course, what we need to put the business case behind it. Looking at the future then, I think we've proved that there's a crisis. We proved that there's an interest. Brands are wanting it. We know that consumers have changed. So what are the big things that we need to scale up where we are right now for the future?
I mean, it's probably going back to those action points by the Global Fashion Agenda. You know, we really need to increase the volume of garments being collected, used garments being collected. So, you know, so we need to collect more to be able to accelerate the process of making clothes made of post-consumer.
So that's like brands doing more take-back programs, exactly. Yeah, selling through. I mean, I just saw Farfetch has got a take-back, JD in China, of course, Zara, H&M, etc. So we want more of that, right?
Yeah, but at the same time, you need system. How do you support that? You know, the reverse logistics side of it. You know, that is not usually built into a supply chain. So how do you put it into your business actually? And you know, and what do you do with it after you collected it all?
That's the elephant in the room. What do you do with it when you've collected all of these, secondhand discarded clothes?
I think that's really when we talk about scale here, because what we're seeing is that if more people are collecting it, but if you're not doing anything with it, basically you're creating more problem. So what we need to do is actually create, what we need more is actually technologies to support that to happen. Technologies that will support, recycling clothing, fiber, etc. And sorting is first steps are actually how do you sort them, and then before you recycle them actually. So in a way, it's actually quite a huge opportunities for those who are in innovation in technologies actually.
In sorting is a nightmare of post-consumer waste, right? It's often Kay's nightmare because Redress actually collects clothing from Zara, the post-consumer donations from Zara. So can you just speak a little bit about RFID and whether or not, any sort of digital, any tagging on clothes will help the sorting of post-consumer?
Yeah, because, as I said earlier, a lot of the clothes, or is made of mixed fiber. So we don't really know, once you collect it, you don't really know what is there. So if there's like the FRD, that technology is really helping us to track what that garment is made of originally. So rather than us, currently what we do is to read the fiber label, the care label.
Literally reading care label.
So, and a lot of it is actually, we all know, is not perhaps 100% accurate. So that really hamper the quality of the recycled fiber you're going to make afterward. So if we've got technologies that really help us to identify what fibers those collected clothes are made of, that will really solve, that bottleneck. Because humanly trying to check the fiber content is mad, and a lot of this responsibility is actually on non-profit organizations like Redress at the moment. But saying that though, perhaps there's huge opportunity for for-profit, because just relying on non-profit where our expertise, we're not a waste management company, for example, and we're not a technology company, it's really hard to scale up. So we really need the industry to work together to be able to scale this up.
Yeah, I always think that, whoever can solve mixed fibers is going to be the next billionaire. Anyway, Michelle, over to you, future of the circular fashion industry.
So I mentioned re-commerce and subscription and rental before, and I do genuinely believe that that's kind of the, you kind of need to bake in circularity into your business model. At the end of the day, consumers are demanding more environmentally friendly product. So there is a demand for this, and that's really shown even with our business at the R Collective. We're seeing fantastic adoption of what we're doing. The luxury brands are really keen to provide us the fabric, but on the other side, where we're wholesaling product, we are available in Lane Crawford. We launched in Barney's in New York. And I'm really pleased to announce that we will be on Net-a-Porter's Net Sustain from January as well. So there's clearly already a demand from the consumer. So we just need to make it more accessible and easier for consumers to shop from these circular solutions. And of course, I understand that many brands are kind of having to retrofit, into kind of sustainability and building circularity into their model. But really, that's sort of the future, I think, for brands and retail, is really trying to build that into your business model. Because at the end of the day, the statistics are there. It shows that it does drive a higher profit margin per garment. So it just kind of makes business sense, really.
Can I add something here? On the consumer side, actually, it's really important to how do you increase that communication? How do you tell the customer what they're buying is, first of all, it's more sustainable, and secondly, why is it sustainable? Because people are, a lot of knowledge out there now. People actually know a lot, so you need to be clear, why is it sustainable? What does it mean in terms of, combating climate change, for example? Because this is what really people care for, right?
Yeah, no, I think educating consumers is an ongoing process, right? Obviously, consumers are a lot more aware than they ever used to be with climate strikes happening. But as you say, there is so much information out there, but it's not necessarily so easy for consumers to understand and digest this information. I mean, Ellen MacArthur, you mentioned earlier, they recently published a report on climate change. And they stated that even if we were to all switch to renewable energy, that it would only cut our greenhouse global emissions by 55%. 45% comes from the way we make and use products. So I think that's driving that home and actually really, helping educate people that they have a real impact as well on climate change and climate impact based on how they consume, but also how we make the product as well. I think that's just an ongoing education that we need to do.
Wonderful. Thank you very, very much. Kay, Michelle, thank you for joining me. I hope that we've given you some insight into obviously what is a very, very broad and complex sector, but I hope we've given you some entry points in Snapchat. Yeah, we're all about digital here and next gen. Have a lovely rest of the morning. Thank you.